Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and this is Prime. Florida's Board of Education has voted unanimously to ban critical race theory. Governor Ron DeSantis opened the meeting with a virtual address where he equated critical race theory with spreading of false hysterical narratives. Isn't that rich?
Trying to create narratives that basically are teaching kids that the country is rotten and that our institutions are illegitimate. That is not worth any taxpayer dollars. It's wrong, and it's not something that we should do. So thank you for what you're doing.
Doubled down on his criticism of critical race theory and tweeted, Florida's education system exists to create opportunities for our children. Critical race theory teaches kids to hate our country and to hate each other. It is state-sanctioned racism and has no place in Florida schools. Let us not forget that DeSantis is the same governor that just last month signed a more restrictive voting rights bill into law impacting mail-in voting and voter ID restrictions. He also signed an anti-riot bill that is essentially an anti-protesting bill that legal experts argue is unconstitutional and infringes on protesters' First Amendment rights. But DeSantis is not alone in his angst over critical race theory. Florida has become at least the fifth state following Idaho, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Tennessee enacting a ban on critical race theory. The Nevada Family Alliance, a watchdog advocacy group, has pushed for teachers to even wear body cameras to ensure they aren't teaching critical race theory. According to Karen England, their executive director, if police do a better job interacting with the public when they are wearing body cameras, how much more important is it for teachers to do the same? But listen, let me tell you something. Understand this. This is not about critical race theory at all. You will be hard-pressed to find a high school teaching this as a core component of their curriculum. You might even have a hard time finding a college that teaches it as a core part of their curriculum. This is about a recent phenomenon among Republicans where when Democrats are in power in Washington, they create straw men of otherness and fearmonger the hell out of it. Remember when Barack Obama was in office and states passed laws banning the use of foreign or religious laws in state courts? The public pitch for that was the banning of Sharia law, Islamic law, even though there was no state in where that was ever in danger of being adopted. And the recent ban on trans girls competing in girls' sports is the same thing. This isn't a problem. Not only is the science not there, the number is minuscule, and the statistics do not back up the fear. For instance, a USA Today report has put it this way. In the more than 8 years since California Interscholastic Federation began allowing high school athletes to compete as the gender with which they identify, there has not been a single case in which a trans female athlete has been dominant enough to stir protests. None of these things were ever the thing. Critical race theory is not the thing. These are just fear tactics that Republicans use for political advantage to energize their voters who are panicked about change and about otherness. Joining us to discuss is a senior writer at The Root, Michael Harriot. Michael, glad you to be here. I read your piece today, amazing. As you point out, this is not being taught. I mean, as a core part of high school curriculum. What is this about?
So I have another theory, right? So we know that the United Daughters of the Confederacy control the American publishing of textbooks, of history textbooks specifically, to push the lost cause narrative for years. And after losing this recent battle for Confederate statues, I think they've moved on to this to fight this 1619 project in schools that will teach American students true history. So I think that's part of it, but it's also, as you said, part of this dog whistle, othering this culture war that Republicans, I almost said Confederates, but it's the same thing, that they push because they don't want to talk about real things like, voter suppression or the inquiry into the Capitol insurrection. Instead, they'd rather do all of these things that rile up their base and make their base think that their children are going to be under attack.
I want to pull somebody into our conversation here. Charlie Pierce, writer for Esquire, has now joined us. We were waiting for him. Charlie, are you there?
There, and it's always good. See,
oh, there
Charles
you are. How are you,
common.
sir?
I'm fine. We have something in
What's
common.
that?
We're both fencing parents. We're both fencing parents.
Isn't that nice?
My son Brendan is the head coach at Boston College.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Now I know another fencing parent who is also in journalism.
Yeah, Saber guy. Though, he's a little
so,
nuts.
Charlie, let me ask you this question about what's happening here. They're rushing in to ban critical race theory. The 1619 Project is an actual additive thing to curriculum, and it actually teaches something about history. But it doesn't have the same sizzle as have something with race in the title. Critical race sounds sexier and more menacing if you are afraid of dealing with race, and therefore they attach to this, even though very few people, I think, even understand what it means. That is born out of legal scholarship. So, what do you think they're rushing in about the critical race theory rather than something else?
I think we've entered into another period of severe white backlash, and critical race theory is now the shorthand for everything. I mean, you can say the 1619 project for most people, and they have to Google a year. They don't know what you don't know what you're talking about. But you say critical race theory, and you've got like an instant bogeyman on your hands. And I've seen this happen before, and I don't know why people fall for it over and over and over again. But I think last summer, and certainly with the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, the parts of our history that we don't know are right up front. And for example, the only reason I knew about the Tulsa massacre was because I read a book called On the Lap of the Gods about the Red Summer, and because of John Singleton's movie about Rosewood, which got me looking up all the others, basically. But I just, from a political standpoint, you've got, a conservative movement in this country that has shot its bolt. It has nothing left anymore. The economics have fallen apart. They've lost national defense. They've really lost law and order when you come right down to it. And all they have are basically crazy people and the people who enable them. So they're going straight for the id on everything, and they seem to have found it. They seem to think they found this here. How can you possibly ban something?
Right.
How can you ban history? How do you do that? You can argue about history, and that's enormously helpful. But to say, no, we're not going to teach it, or we're going to be careful. I mean, we went through this with the McCarthy period. I'm kind of uniquely sensitive to it because I've studied a lot of Irish history. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the British did during their brutal colonial period was to wipe out the Irish ethnic memory, tribal memory, wipe out the language, wipe out the culture, wipe out, the oral history that went back hundreds, thousands of years.
Right.
I don't want to see that happen here. It happened too long.
Well, I want to get Michael in on this. I want you to jump in on that because it seems to me on some level this is about who has the right to construct the American narrative about what America is and has been and will be. That anything that challenges the existing narrative about what America sees itself as and how it came to be is an existential threat to some people, and that they will fight tooth and nail to defend themselves against that, even if it is a correction of the narrative.
Well, so I like what you're saying, and I kind of agree with it, but I agree with Charlie also. And I want to point out, first of all, that I am a fencing parent too, a foil fencing parent. My daughter was a fencer too. And
There we go.
but I think that the important part to remember is that they really don't care about critical race theory or how they teach history in schools. Republicans don't. This is not a thing that they care about. They care about the outrage and the dog whistle more than they care about the actual thing that they're trying to outlaw. So they don't really care, because when you think about it, those those people, their kids don't go to regular school with your kids and my kids. So they don't care about how we learn history, because they know those people. All, here's a great example, right? The Alabama legislature is considering a bill to ban critical race theory. Most of the Alabama legislature went to Alabama School of Law. One of the founders of critical race theory is the dean of the Alabama Law School. And they keep saying, well, we don't teach it in our school, and we want to in our state, but we want to prevent it. As if one of the founders isn't teaching it at the school that they attended. They don't care about the issue. They care about the reaction to the issue and the othering of the people who want to teach the true history of America.
Yeah, I mean,
So, Charlie, what do you think the political ramifications of this will be? Is this just to juice up and excite the base to say, they're trying to push something on your children, they're trying to indoctrinate your children, you have to get out and vote so that your children will not be indoctrinated?
Yeah, certainly. I think, it's not that dissimilar to the textbook wars and the unfortunate attempts to run evolution out of schools, except this one is, it has to do with America's original sin and the foundational, myths of the country, not science or how to, new math or old math or any of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think the real target is the spirit and the literal reality of the 1619 Project. I think that's what they're really after. But as you said right off the top, there's no sizzle for that. If you're an ambitious political consultant, critical race theory is something you can put on a bumper sticker. And I do not know where the notion that critical race, and you'll see this in all of the school board fights that are on YouTube, that critical race theory is Marxism. I don't know where that came from.
Well, I mean, you can't figure any of this out because none of it makes sense. The Italians were interfering with the election with satellite. None of it makes sense. All of this is just made up in order to excite people and get them energized and get them out to vote, because the Republicans do not believe that they energized their voters enough, even though, there were record numbers of people voting for Donald Trump. He got more votes than any other Republican candidate in history. It's just that Joe Biden got more than he got. Yeah, but I think, Michael, I think that the Republicans depend on an inexhaustible rage. That there is no Republican Party left without rage against something. So they have to have something, and this has just become the latest thing to wrap that rage around. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, as Mr. Pierce just said, right, they can't argue economics, right? They can't argue that trickle-down thing like they did in the 80s. They can't argue about national defense anymore. They can't argue about law and order once they storm the Capitol. So the only thing that they can do is just say, if you vote for the Democrats, they're going to make your children hate their whiteness. They're going to make all the black kids hate your kids, and they're going to make your kids hate America. That's all they got. That's the only thing they have left. Right. So this big boogeyman of critical race theory, even though it's important to point out that critical race theory has nothing to do with teaching history in high school. No school is teaching it anyway, right?
Exactly.
But it's the boogeyman that they're giving to people who don't know anything about critical race theory anyway.
No, I was reading. I don't know. I think it was the law in Oklahoma. I'm not sure, don't hold me to the state, but it's one of the ones I was reading about, where they're essentially banning any teaching that's critical of the founders. And all I could think of is, my God, have these guys read what the founders said about each other?
Right.
You know, I mean, these people were ripping their own guts out, and most of them were slaveholders. But it's not like the country was born, you know, with a polite, you know, political argument. It was born in you know, radical civil disobedience. I mean, my God, William Lloyd Garrison called the Constitution a pact with the devil. He'll never teach.
Charlie, we're going to have you back to talk about the pact with the devil of the Constitution, because that's a whole rich subject unto itself. We could go into that for a whole segment. Michael Harriot and Charlie Pierce, thank you both for joining me. All fencing dads across the board. See you guys. Thank you very much. A new investigation unveils Trump's desperate attempt to spy on the People's House. You're watching Crime on BNC.